Are you a small business owner struggling to nail down your brand voice? Have you hired copywriters only to discover they couldn't capture your messaging? If that sounds like you, then you need to download my free resource, Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps. Once you complete these simple steps, you will have a solid foundation for producing your business copy. Whether you decide to write your own content or outsource it to a professional, like, say, me. As an added bonus, you'll be automatically subscribed to my email list, where you can learn more about my writing services and receive weekly updates about my podcast, Emotional Abuse is Real. Head over to the link in the show notes to grab Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps today. Trigger warning, this podcast episode features discussions about cults, toxic health practitioners, as well as emotional abuse and coercive control in health and wellness groups. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Emotional Abuse is Real. I'm your host, Sarene Leeds. I'm a professional writer and storyteller, and I'm so glad you're here. On today's episode, we're talking more about emotional abuse and coercive control among health and wellness practitioners and groups. My guest, Kim Peirano, is not only a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, but she experienced firsthand the kind of emotional abuse and coercive control that I've been talking about throughout this dedicated series. As you'll hear during our conversation, what she initially thought was a meditation school actually turned out to be a cult. But as always, before we get into the episode, I have a few quick announcements. Please make sure you're following me on Instagram at Sarene Leeds Writes. That's SareneleedsWrites, and that you're subscribed to this podcast on either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Also, don't forget to support Emotional Abuse is Real by leaving a 5-star rating and by writing a review over on Apple Podcasts. If you're interested in sharing your emotional abuse experience on this podcast, please either DM me on Instagram, email me at hello@sereneleadswrites.com, or fill out my quick and simple application form. I've left links to my Instagram, email, the show's application form, and my free download, Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps, in the show notes. If any of you out there have had misgivings about certain kinds of health and wellness practitioners or groups, this is definitely the episode for you. My guest, Kim, shares a multitude of tips on how to spot cult-like situations. And she also shares several ways to keep yourself safe when exploring alternative health options. Anyway, without further ado, here's my conversation with Kim Peirano. So, Kim, when we connected, I was especially interested in chatting with you because you are a tailor-made guest for this podcast, and especially this dedicated series. You mentioned that you work with clients who are recovering from things like coercive control, cultic abuse, and narcissistic abuse, particularly in the health and wellness industry and New Age spirituality. So, first of all, how did you get into this particular field?
So it's kind of a, like life steers you in different directions sort of a story.
Oh, yeah.
I've been an acupuncturist since 2010. So like health and wellness has been my primary focus for a very long time. And about, I guess it was like 2013-ish, I ended up joining a like meditation school, which turned out to be a cult. So this, like, it was very like new agey kind of a thing. And in my deconstruction from like figuring that out and leaving that group, my own personal experience with that, I really I think people in general are kind of fascinated with cults and coercive control and mind control. It's like so interesting. Yeah. So I like dove headfirst into all of that, like, because I wanted to learn more about like why does this happen and how does it happen and what's going on here? And then bridging that with my work, like in the pandemic, I leaned into coaching and hypnotherapy as a way to like be able to see people online since we had to close clinics for a little while. And I really started to like tie the whole picture together where it was like, oh, this is like this type of how we understand cults and coercive control is like really translatable to many different industries and different things. So seeing how that was showing up in health and wellness was kind of profound. I was like, wow, this is kind of a problem. And that's a lot of the clients that I work with like coaching and hypnotherapy is around like people who are living with chronic and terminal illnesses and like have been harmed by those type of practices, where it's like maybe it's practitioners who just aren't trained or people who led people very astray. And I've seen how this like can be really detrimental.
So I definitely want to get into how you help people, but would you mind sharing just a little bit about your experience in the meditation cult? How did you realize that it was an unhealthy group, and how did you end up leaving?
Yeah. So like many of these groups, it works in like a tiered system, right? Like you show up the
Yes.
first time and it's like profound. You learn a lot of cool stuff. And that's how groups like this and practitioners and people like get you involved is like
Yeah.
they are giving away something that's really beneficial. So the beginning of my experience with that group was just like that. I was like, this is great. It's totally what I was looking for. There's like the leader is very like, he's very sure of himself. And that's what I needed, right? It was like somebody to guide me along. And as I progressed like deeper into this group, they like, there's classes and levels. So as you like go up in levels, you get more like secret information.
Yeah.
There was an incident where there was a retreat and they caused a COVID outbreak at this retreat and like completely botched like
No.
taking care of it, right? Like holding themselves accountable and like, what are we going to do moving forward? And because this school like and the group relied so heavily on like psychic readings of things, it would be like, oh, I read that it was from the hotel worker when it was very clearly like you can't blame anybody in a sense. Like we can't know that information.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my first like eye-opening moment where I was like, oh, these people aren't as like correct as I thought they were.
Yeah.
And then I started kind of digging into like, where did all of this stuff come from? And that was one of the things that we see happen a lot is like questioning things or having criticisms is really shunned and pushed away.
Yes.
So anytime anybody asks like, where did this information come from? You were like given a thought stopping technique to like go meditate again and ask your question differently. Nobody would ever answer those things. And I think around this time, like it was like ChatGPT started being a thing. And so I would sit in class, like not paying attention and asking ChatGPT, like, where did this concept come from? And it turned out like almost all of it was like from Scientology. So he was like stealing things from Scientology, passing it off as his own.
Right.
I was like, I'm a non-consenting Scientologist. Like, how did this happen? I didn't sign up for this.
Right.
And it took about a year to like, I think this whole process was like 2 years total, but a year of like really gearing up to leave because of so many like phobias and fears that the group embeds in you that like, if you leave, your life's going to fall apart. All of these things. And then I just left.
Effect. Yeah.
I didn't say anything to anybody.
Good.
I just stopped showing up. Yeah. And
did they make any financial demands on you?
You paid for classes.
Okay.
Which were like, it started at $30 a month when I started, and then it was $50 or a week. So per class, which was like 3 hours, which isn't like crazy. But one of the other pieces was like, you know, any problem in your life had a spiritual cause, right? And the
Mhm.
solution to a spiritual problem is spiritual healing, which then you
Mhm.
would pay for with like teachers or other people who are like associated with the school. And that
Mhm.
cost definitely can add up.
Got it. So, all right. So, coming back to how you help people, uh, as a clinician, what kinds of, in addition to, I mean, I know you've already shared your own personal experience, what kind of emotional abuse have you observed in people who have also been involved with such toxic health and wellness groups or practitioners?
I mean, there's so much. And
Yeah.
it's not just emotional too, right? It's like
Sure.
psychological and
Yep.
spiritual and physical too, in a
Yeah.
sense. When, you know, you're working with a practitioner, you just got a cancer diagnosis, they tell you, I can cure you with herbs. And
Hmm.
then 6 months go down and now you have stage 4 cancer. Like that's
Yeah.
physical abuse, right?
Totally.
Um, a lot, like one of the things that's coming up lately is like this kind of gaslighting effect where
Oh, yeah. Sure.
people, and it's not even necessarily from practitioners, but like friends or people you know, and they're like giving you shit over the treatments you choose to take, where it's
Hmm.
like, I'm going to do chemo and get this surgery. And they're like, don't you know you're putting poison in your body?
Right. Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
and that like guilting, which then sows in doubt, where you're wondering, like, is this actually the right choice?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so there's a
Everyone's
lot,
a doctor. Everyone's a
totally.
doctor now. Yeah.
And it's a lot that, like, I think one of the biggest damages is that it's really sowing doubt in people's minds and really making you like question your own. It's like, you know, the effect of being gaslit, like in a
Yeah.
relationship, and you're like, I
Absolutely.
don't know what's right anymore.
Exactly.
Um, and when you're dealing with health concerns, like that's the least thing you want to deal with. There's so many other things.
So, what should people watch out for when selecting whether it's a health and wellness practitioner or, say, a meditation group or some sort of health and wellness group? How can we recognize practitioners with true authority and integrity?
Yeah. This is, it's kind of hard,
Yeah,
right? Like,
sure.
you don't, the saying is like, nobody joins a cult, you only leave them, because like when you sign up, you have no idea. It's not
Yeah,
until we're like really in it and then usually really out of it before we can like really see what was happening.
sure.
Um, I always come back to like, there's kind of two ways we can look at this. Like, the first is like, who are we talking to,
Hmm.
right? Health and wellness, especially like alternative health and wellness, there's
Hmm.
basically zero barrier to entry.
Mm,
Like, anybody can call themselves a health coach. Anybody
right,
can call themselves a nutritionist, right?
right.
There's no licensure there.
Yeah,
So that means like somebody can, your aunt can say tomorrow that she's a nutritionist with
yeah.
25 years of experience because she's been eating for 25 years, right? Like, there's
Right.
not there's not any barrier to entry. And with
Mhm,
that means like we need to really have our awareness cap on when we're like looking for people. And
mhm,
there's also a really big gradation there. And like
mhm,
somebody can be in a, so there's unlicensed fields, right?
mhm.
Coaching, nutrition, all of these things where there's no
Yeah,
license, but
yeah.
certifications. But because
Yes.
there's no license, the certification could be 5 hours or 500 hours. They're very
Mhm.
different.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's licensed fields, like I'm an acupuncturist, right? Like
Right.
you
Sure.
have a master's degree or doctorate, you take a licensing board exam, you do continuing education, you have malpractice insurance. There's like a
Yeah.
lot of bars to hit there. And like there can be good practitioners that have no licenses, and there can be really terrible practitioners who do have licenses. Like, doesn't necessarily mean that just because somebody has a license, they're going to be really good for you.
Yeah.
But I think the first question that we need to ask people is like, what's your education? What's your training? What's your background? And
Yeah.
for me, like, if there's any lack of transparency there, that's a no for me,
Okay.
right? Like,
Yeah.
if they're like kind of skate around that question, no. Um, we see this with like whenever I see like health coaches pop up, I'm like, that looks kind of shady. I'll go to their website and there's like no, there's a personal story that's super compelling,
Yeah.
but no training, like nothing's listed.
No
And that's
credentials.
a red flag for me where I'm like,
Sure.
like, Could they be helpful? Possibly, but
Yeah.
like, where's the transparency there? So I want a lot of transparency with like who I'm talking to. And we want to like have some evidence behind the treatments or behind what we're doing. We want to know like what happens if this doesn't work, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I've seen so many people recently that have been like kind of very harmed by functional medicine or
Hmm.
like not very trained nutritionists where they're like on really restrictive like auto-inflammatory protocol diets, like food restriction diets to try to figure out like is it a food problem,
Yeah.
which is a legitimate thing to do, but that's not a permanent solution, right? And if
Hmm.
you've been on a reduction, you're only eating like bananas and toast and you still feel bad
Yeah.
3 months into this, like that's a sign that's not the thing for you. So like what do we do when this isn't working? How long do we do this for? What should I notice in this process? And if somebody's not willing to like change the pattern or like
Hmm.
change the protocol,
Hmm.
that's also something I would watch for. And we can ask that up front, right? You
Yeah.
can say, hey, like I want to do this. This is my concerns. What would be your approach to that? And then what do we do when that or if that doesn't work? Like, what's the next stage? So,
Hmm.
does that person have the skill and ability to know when they need to refer you to a medical doctor? Is
Hmm.
another big one,
Yeah.
which is usually missing in those like unlicensed areas.
And a lot of people don't know the questions to ask, which is why I'm so glad that we're talking about this. And I appreciate that you brought up how there are so many unlicensed, uncredentialed nutritionists out there because one person who's going to be featured in this series is a therapist who specializes in eating disorders. And she had an experience in her own, she called it a yoga cult, where she said for a very long time, by instruction, her breakfast was a powder with water. And
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what your health is, that is not going to work for anybody in the long term.
totally.
Exactly. Yeah.
We see like a lot of eating disorders develop out of this
Hmm.
like hyper focus on health stuff, right? The like gym bro who's like, I saw something, they were like, my health thing costs $35,000 a year. Like you're doing so many treatments and protocols and fancy supplements and it's like that expensive.
Yeah.
Um, or you're afraid to eat certain things because the nutritionist had told you this is bad. And the stress of like the eating disorder is far more impactful to your health than
Yeah.
like whatever we might even be treating in a lot of cases, which is really discouraging.
Because at least some of this series is dedicated to multi-level marketing companies, I did want to ask you about how a lot of the products that are sold through these companies tend to make false promises. Like I was obsessed with how during the pandemic, Young Living essential oils were like claiming that certain products of theirs could like help cure COVID or like help prevent COVID and I
Right.
was just like, no, that's not the way this works. So what can we do about situations like that? Like how can people educate themselves to ensure that they're not endangering others by either buying these products or even promoting products that are not going to cure your diseases?
I mean, unfortunately, in a sense, like don't buy anything from an MLM, right? Like
Yes.
those are cults. It's like the picture
Yes.
perfect definition.
Yes.
Cults don't have to be religious. They don't have to be spiritual. It can 100% be a business. And like MLMs are the perfect model of a business cult. It's like the
Oh, they're so
pyramid function and like nobody
Yep.
makes money doing it. It's like,
Nope.
and they're selling those like false dreams, right? So like
They
number
really
one,
are.
like just steer clear. We can find
Yes.
somebody else. And people, one of the methods I use, I have a mnemonic to like remember certain qualities about
Oh,
groups or leaders to
yeah.
help you like recognize those things. And ultimately, like none of these things are bad on their own. Like even the qualities of cults like that we see in different models, like none of them are necessarily bad, particularly like in a healthcare relationship. You're actually paying somebody to control certain things for you, right?
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
we're giving you information and behaviors that you need to modify. Like that's part of coercive control, but it's in a like functional way where we're actually trying to change behaviors. It's when we take away your autonomy to do something or to choose it that it becomes really toxic. Um, but ultimately, like when we're looking at like signing up for something or working with somebody, the feelings we need to watch out for are what I think are the most important thing. And
Yeah.
that's like your nervous system being activated. And usually in these cases, it's excitement.
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
excitement is the thing we want to stay away from.
Yeah.
It's like excitement, anxiety, and fear are the most popular ones. And it's like, like you have something where you can get it on sale and you're like, I can't, I have to do it by Saturday or I'm going to miss out.
Yeah.
Um,
Flash
and those
sale. Everyone
totally
loves to give the flash sale.
like
Yeah.
this is going to be the absolute
This is
cure for
it.
my problem. And
Right.
like, they said I can lose 30 pounds in a month. That's totally doable. Like, no,
Yeah.
it's not.
No. No.
Um, So that type of excitement and fear and anxiety is the feeling we have to watch out for. And we want to
Okay.
basically just never make a decision from that space. Like
Yeah.
apply this advice to dating, the
Mhm.
person you dated who gave you all the butterflies, who's like, I love you at the first like date. Like every relationship like that for me has like absolutely crashed and burned and kind of ruined my life. Like we don't want to do that. And we can
Sure.
apply the same thing to the people we employ on our care team or the stuff we sign up for. So the mnemonic I use is cult,
Uh-huh.
super easy to remember.
Yeah.
The C is for charisma and certainty.
Mhm.
So charisma is like usually the thing we notice in gurus and cult leaders, right? They're
Oh, yeah.
charismatic, they speak well, they're really interesting. Maybe they're flashy, maybe they're not like, but they have that sense of charisma, which
Mhm.
is like bolstered by the sense of certainty. So when we're looking at like an MLM or a product, that product isn't charismatic, but it has certainty attached to it. This thing will do XYZ,
Right.
right? And those are things like certainty can be backed by evidence. We can
Mhm.
say, yes, this product does cure this 85% of the time. We have this study to prove that. So that's how we can double check in that area, right? If it's like, oh, it's going to do this for sure, like where's the evidence to tell me that? What can
Mhm.
I look at? And like most people are not trained in reading evidence
Yeah.
or scientific literature. So that's really tough. But like even asking, right, in a
Yeah.
lot of these cases, you might get a funky answer that's
E
really
e
skirting the question.
Exactly. It's like you said before about even when you ask questions with these people, like they don't want you asking questions. They just want you
Totally.
to toe the company line or toe the group's line and just go with the flow and repeat back the script. And I mean, like you said, I find these kinds of groups fascinating, which is why I'm doing this series. And I said in my intro episode, like I've been trying to cover this topic for years, and I'm just so glad that I'm finally finding people to talk to about it now.
So the C, we have charisma, certainty. The U is uniqueness, and that's the uniqueness of the person or product that they're selling you. This is the only thing. And this is where we see like black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking show up, right? This is the
Mhm.
only thing. This is our unique method. And again, not a problem on its own necessarily, but something that really triggers that reaction within you.
Yeah.
L is for love bombing
Yep.
in dating, right? It's like, I love you. Let's move in together. I've known you for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
In, like typical cults, it's like, oh, you're home. Like, we're so glad you're here. Like in the group that I was in, there was none of that. But you
Mhm.
were told you were very special for showing up because not everybody is at the level they need to be to do this work, right? So love bombing ultimately makes you feel unique and you feel special. So you
Mhm.
feel chosen, right? You found this special thing. And then the T is time pressure or like urgency, right? You need to
Yeah.
sign up today. This is the super pressury sales call. Or like if you sign up now, you get $2,500 instead of $1,000, like whatever that is. So those are the like 4 qualities that I watch out for that I think you
Yeah.
can notice at the beginning a little more easily.
Yeah.
And ultimately, those are the things that trigger that nervous system response that we need to be aware of. And so when we have that, you're like, I'm so excited. I need to sign up for this by Sunday. Like, take that time to downregulate, to like feel calm again. That's always a sign for me. Like, take a pause, like, do more research, look into this
Yeah.
person more, look at their Google reviews. Like, what else can we find out about this before signing up or before making that decision or like employing that person as part of your care team?
I'm really glad that you've been talking about love bombing as something to really notice with your own reaction, because in my experience, I never made it past the love bombing stage, because I started really getting into this because people were trying to recruit me. And it started with the love bombing, like, oh my God, your hair's so gorgeous. Want to check out these products? And I was just like, okay, well, I didn't use this word back then, but I was like, well, that's sus. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally.
I mean, but I appreciate, because it's so easy to fall into the love bombing trap. So just the fact that you're coaching people to use that as part of their realization that this may not be something that's good or healthy for them.
Totally.
Yeah, I just wanted to
And
say that.
it's like one of those things that takes a really big mind shift to like get into, because like love bombing is fun, right?
Yeah,
It's fun and it feels
yeah,
great and you're like, yeah, this is so exciting and we love that feeling. But
sure.
like the things that are usually good for us help us feel calm, right? We feel present, we feel in our body, we feel here. And that's kind of boring. It's not exciting at all. But
Yeah.
that's like safe and that's what, ultimately gets us what we want. And usually that excitement is like much less exciting, but longer term, right? Where it can continue on.
Yeah, I I loved hearing like, "Oh my God, your photo's so gorgeous." Even though I took a minute, I was like, "Oh, I'm sure that's scripted. That doesn't feel genuine. I don't know who the hell that is." But so
In
that's good.
the Vans store,
Uh-huh.
I like bought my partner's kids Vans for Christmas for their birthdays or something. And so I had to go to the store like 5 different times because I
Yeah.
got the wrong sizes.
Mm.
Part of their script is to give you a compliment on your shoes. So every store I go in, they're like, you have really cool shoes. I'm like, thanks. And
Yeah.
then it happens like 4 more times. They're like, oh, this is the plan. That's hilarious. And how well it works, where you're like, oh,
Yeah.
this person likes me. I'm going to talk to them.
Exactly.
Great sales
Exactly.
tactic.
Very good sales tactic. I do agree. So, yes, I am very excited to hear that you're going to be presenting at the International Cultic Studies Association conference this year on the cult of health and wellness. So I'd love to hear more about what you'll be covering and the details of this conference so that others can learn more about it.
So I guess it depends a little when this podcast airs, because the conference is actually July 3rd through the 6th. So that's
Okay.
coming up super fast.
Okay. So this is going to air. Yeah, I'm glad we brought that up. Yeah, this is probably going to air in a little bit later in July.
Yeah. But I
Okay.
imagine, so I've kind of taken my presentation from there. It's like the cult of health and wellness. How do we navigate wellness
Yeah.
in uncertain times, right? Because we've had so much happen in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And basically, what I do in that talk, and I've kind of been posting it on my Instagram so you can
Mhm.
get the little snippets of it,
Okay.
is going through Robert J. Lifton's 8 criteria for thought reform, which is the model we use to understand cults,
Mhm.
and like investigating further how those apply to health and wellness or how they might show up. So it's a really good like playlist of videos to give you things to look for around like what might be a toxic practitioner or thing to do and like what's the opposite of that, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
Like one of the criteria is demand for purity. In religion, that's like confessing your sins and like sexual purity or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's sort of the essence of a lot of health and wellness culture, right? It's like your
Absolutely.
body needs to be perfect and this and this and that. And we've really embodied that in and of itself, like this idea that having a disease is morally apprehensible, which is just totally false. Like, we're all going to get sick. That's kind of part of life. Your body is not meant to last forever. And it creates a lot of disorder and a lot of pain and problems for people. And then with practitioners, we might see people who are like, you have to stick to this plan. And if you don't, I'll fire you or like shame you or guilt you because you didn't do all of this perfectly. So like, where is the balance there? Like, yeah, we set up this plan. You do the best you can and we adjust as we go along would be something that somebody's who's going to be a helpful person for you might tell you to do.
Yeah. So I know we talked a lot about different kinds of red flags, but just dovetailing off of what you just said, what are some other green flags that can help people identify safer groups and safer practitioners?
Yeah. So some of the like green flags, right, is
the credentials,
I think,
of course.
Like credentials are great.
Yeah.
Transparency is even better.
Yeah.
As an acupuncturist, like functional medicine has really taken off. I have a beef with functional medicine. Sorry. But it gets really misrepresented. People will call themselves, I'm a functional medicine doctor, when they're actually a doctor of acupuncture, Chinese medicine, or doctor of chiropractic. Like there's no such thing as a functional medicine doctor. That degree doesn't exist. So how is that person representing themselves?
Okay. Well, what is functional medicine?
So functional medicine is like, it's sort of the idea that, like you get your lab work from the lab and it says your labs are all normal. But that those ranges aren't the optimal ranges, that it's actually different than that. And so what you'll usually get when you go to a functional medicine practitioner, and these people, it's like they're trying to answer the unanswerable question. Like a lot of people who end up at functional medicine, it's like you have a constellation of symptoms that your doctor says, well, everything's normal. Like, and you're like, I feel like absolute garbage every day.
Right.
I need to do something about this and nobody's helping me. So functional medicine, not covered by insurance. Like you're going to go out of pocket to spend $600 on lab work. Then that person's going to look through the lab work, say, oh, all these things are in normal range according to medicine, but according to functional medicine, you're way off. And then prescribe nutrition, diets, supplements, usually in another $1,000 range. So it's a very expensive thing to do. And for some people, like it probably works and it works great. My experience and the people that I work with, like it gives you a sense of control because you're doing something that feels like, oh, I'm doing something about this, but it doesn't give you the results that you want. And you spend a lot of money. And this is where things can get really, really wonky. Like I had a patient who was on like 75,000 IUs of vitamin D a day because chiropractor told him to do that. And he was having dementia symptoms because of the vitamin D overdose, essentially. So there's, it's a really wishy-washy gray area. And functional medicine also, like there's some programs that are pretty good and it's like there is some validity to it for sure. But you don't have to be a doctorate of anything to practice functional medicine. It's also another certificate program. So who you're seeing and how they're representing themselves is something that I really look at when we're talking about these like green flags, right?
Sure.
And another patient was like, I'm going to see my functional neurologist. Like this guy is a chiropractor. He's not a neurologist to any degree. Why are we calling him that?
Wow. Okay.
I try to like, I'm kind of not even calling myself Dr. Kim anymore because of like, this is sort of misrepresenting. Like, yeah, I have a doctorate degree, but we should be calling ourselves like, I always say Dr. Kim, doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, to like make that very clear. So we want that transparency with that person. How are they representing themselves? What are they saying that they can do for us? Personally, I don't like things where we have to sign up for like really long packages and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because you don't have an
Yeah.
out, right? Now you have an exit cost, which is another piece of coercive control, is that like exit costs. It's not that you
Yeah.
can't leave, but if I leave, I won't get a refund on the $3,500 I paid to work with you.
Right. Right.
Um, and that ability to work with somebody and actually hear you, right?
Yeah.
We want somebody who can like give you all the options and work
Mm-hmm.
with you within what we're working with. I do a lot of menopause in my acupuncture practice,
Yeah.
and people are kind of scared of hormone replacement therapy
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
it's getting more and more popular as the research kind of changes. But people are like, oh, I want to do it naturally. And I'll say, yeah, we can try.
Mm-hmm.
Usually that doesn't work. Right.
Yeah.
I know the limits of my practice and what we're doing. Like, you might get some results for 3 months and it might go back. And so we can help find you a practitioner to go see to get medicine to help with this in a way that's actually going to make the progress you want to see.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so we want people who are transparent,
Yeah.
obviously people who have actual training.
Mm-hmm.
Like, proven results are nice, but we never really know if that's real, right? Somebody
Mm-hmm.
can say, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I helped all these people lose weight." Like, how long do they keep it off for? What's the bigger picture there?
Yeah.
Are they willing to work with you in the level of intensity that you want to do this at,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Do they understand how to do things safely? Do they
Mm-hmm.
understand how to refer you out? That would
Mm-hmm.
be a great question to ask somebody too. Like,
Yeah.
you want to go to a functional medicine person? Cool. Like, you do all of this lab work and things come back wonky. Like, at what place and time are you going to refer me back to my doctor, right? Your
Mm-hmm.
thyroid comes back and it's like 0.02. That's not a job for supplements anymore.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
so do they know when and how to refer you to somebody else? Like, do they know really the limit of what they can do for you?
Sure. No, that's very important. Thank you. So, what advice would you give to someone who may be involved with, say, a toxic health and wellness group, or seeing a wonky practitioner and they don't quite know what that first step to take would be?
So, like, somebody who's maybe realized it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Who's
So you're,
realized that this isn't quite what I signed up for. I don't think this is the right place for me.
yeah.
And they want to go. What would be like a good first step for them?
Well, I mean, first off, you have permission to leave.
Yeah.
I had to give a patient the other day permission to leave a nutritionist.
Mm,
It's like, you have full
yeah.
permission to leave. It's totally okay. Because we have that like sunk cost fallacy thing going on. Like, I've
Yes.
invested
Oh
all
my
this
God.
stuff in
Yes.
here and all this time, and like, maybe the change is right around the corner, but it's been 6 months and I still feel miserable, if not worse than when I started, right?
Right.
You have permission to leave. And I know it sucks because
Yeah.
sometimes you're not going to get that refund. But
Mm-hmm.
like, we have to think of health as that picture of like mind, body, spirit, really. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so your mind and spirit are kind of getting broken when we're dealing with somebody who's toxic. And that's super stressful. Like, it's not good for cortisol levels. It's not good for your body to be in that level of stress.
Yeah.
So even though we might be even doing something that's sort of working, like, the stress of working with that person is probably outweighing the benefit we're getting. So you totally have permission to leave.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the first step. It's like, you deserve somebody who's going to be on your team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's not like, you don't need the like micromanaging boss for your healthcare. That's like, you're a grown person. We don't need
Exactly.
that. You're not a child anymore. Um, so you're allowed to leave, and you can do that however you want.
Yeah.
Like, you want to go yell about it on the internet, you can do that. You want to
Yeah.
just ghost them completely and never talk to them again, also totally okay.
Yeah.
And maybe depending on what we're doing with that person, right? Like, are we on 15 different supplements? And like, what's happening there? Like, how do we downscale this? And maybe there is a session with that person where you do say, hey, this isn't working for me.
Yeah.
And if you have the like will to do so, I would suggest telling this person this, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
which like ghosting them is great. You save yourself. But if we
Yeah.
have the bandwidth to actually have the conversation and give them the feedback that what they're doing is not helping you, is stressing you out, like whatever it is, and you don't want to work with them anymore, tell them.
Yeah.
Like give them a chance to change.
Yeah.
Might fall on deaf ears, but
Yeah.
we always have the possibility.
I've had to do that with a couple of therapists and nothing ever came of it, but it felt good to say, you know what? This isn't working for me anymore. I don't feel that I'm being helped. So, and I think that a lot of people do feel that they can't say those things, that they can't. I like that we're giving them, that you're giving them permission to leave because, and that you brought up the sunk cost fallacy issue, because I feel like that's the term that I read about all the time in these situations. And I think that
Totally.
that's why a lot of people feel like they can't leave. Are there any final thoughts that you wanted to share on this topic?
Oh my gosh. Could go on forever.
I'm sure you could. And I'd love to hear
Um,
it.
yeah. The thing that's like sparkly and exciting
Mm-hmm.
is not the thing, right? The sparkly and exciting person on TikTok with all of the followers. That's another piece of this puzzle, right? Is
Yeah.
like we give a lot of weight to either what a person looks like or what their social media looks like, or how, which is kind of how desirable we think they are in a
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. So social media following has nothing to do with how good a person is going to be at helping you. Somebody's personal story about how they healed themselves also isn't going to help you.
Yeah.
There's a guy on TikTok, Hank Green. He's like a scientist and author, and he
Yeah.
had cancer last year, and he
Mhm.
did some research in like all of the people who claim to have cured their cancer naturally. And he discovered that nobody, like all those authors, all the people who are writing these books, everyone did first line therapy first. They don't talk about how they got chemo or had a surgery. They only talk about the diet they did. So we need to like, don't, it's all about like learning to recognize and then like curb that like excitement
Yes.
push that we get when we're like, oh, this is totally the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like a personal story is great, but you're not them. People's genetics are totally different. We see a lot with like weight loss, right? And there's a lot of MLMs with weight loss stuff,
Oh
and
God.
it's
Yeah.
so detrimental.
Yes.
Those are people who are being called health coaches or nutritionists just for signing up. There's just no training there whatsoever. And a lot of those diets actually do a lot of damage when we do them. When we look at like how it changes your metabolism and the way you're like actually not losing fat at all, you're losing muscle mass. And those are things we need to just have more awareness of. Like there's a bigger picture to things. And when something sounds too good to be true, it usually is.
That is correct. And Instagram is curated, everybody. Because as what you're saying about people sharing their personal story, well, if they're not telling the whole story,
Totally.
then it's not gonna help anyone.
No.
So anyway, Dr. Kim, which I'm going to call you because you are a doctor of acupuncture, and for the record, I do believe in acupuncture. I just want to thank you so much for your time today. And how can people connect with you?
Totally. So I have kind of two legs of my work. So coaching and hypnotherapy I do online and post a lot in those spaces. And my business is called Courage to Transform. So you can @ Courage to Transform on like TikTok and Instagram, and that's the website name. And then my acupuncture practice is called Lion's Heart Wellness, and I'm in Oakland, California. So there's definitely many ways to reach out and connect.
Wonderful. I'll leave links to all of those in the show notes.
Perfect.
And thank you again. It was a pleasure having you on the podcast today.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Kim Peirano on Emotional Abuse is Real. If you would like to connect with Kim, I've left links to both her websites and her social media handles in the show notes. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please reach out via email at hello@sereneleadsrights.com, through Instagram @sereneleadsrights, or fill out my guest application form. Please note that this podcast should not be used as a substitute for professional mental health services. If you are a victim of emotional abuse and need help, please call or text the Suicide and Crisis Hotline at 988, or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START, START, to 88788. Once again, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Instagram and go grab my free download, Discover Your Brand Voice in 3 Easy Steps. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.